Alrighty, good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's episode of Communications and Cigars. I'm your host, John Crook. Welcome to the show. I wasn't even sure I was going to make it back on show. We had a bad accident on the interstate, but hey, we got it back in time. We're here, and tonight's episode is FDMA versus TDMA fight. So tonight's episode is going to really kind of talk about that. Kind of as we're going to start kind of talking a little bit more about digital stuff on there. About in regards to what really is the difference. There's digital modes out there, but really what makes one better than the other? And to be perfectly honest with you, the answer is neither. There's both of the different kind of concept of digital voice modes out there. Each has kind of your own unique thing kind of down there. But tonight we're going to talk about, if you want to think about the paths, how does the digital signal use the frequency that we're going to use. So we're going to kind of be talking a little bit about that. We're going to dive into it, and then we'll kind of progress from there. But first of all, I want to say thank you for joining the show here. Really excited about tonight's episode on there. And I hope to be able to break it down to a level that people can understand. Because this is one of the biggest things I think that people have a hard time dealing with when it comes to digital voice modes on there. They don't understand, like, why is one better than the other? Like, why is TDMA versus better than, well, I shouldn't say that. It's just, why is DMR, okay, DMR, not any kind of things like that on there, but why is DMR better than P25, or why is P25 better than DMR? And how does NextDen come into play? How does, so all this kind of stuff like that on there. But before we get into the show here, I want to go ahead and I first want to say thank you to everybody that does tune into the show, I should say, Monday nights here when we can. Lots of things going on, so we are starting to be able to produce more shows, even if some are recorded, even whatever the case may be, but we're doing these shows on there. But if you ever have any ideas for the show, please feel free to drop us a line, communications-cigars@jjkcom.com. I do have a couple of people that do email me, and I thank you very much for emailing me, for getting that information out there, saying, hey, this and this and this. We had a few that wanted to expand a little bit from last week's episode, which was talking about like the frequency forums and stuff like that on there. They said, hey, you know what, John, that was really great information. I kind of started working on one, and it really helped me kind of lay things out better in the radio, because now they have radios that were public safety based or Part 90 LMR kind of based, where that don't have keypad, that don't have front keypad programming, all that kind of stuff. You have to use a computer. To some that they have like amateur radios, or they have like other kind of radios, which kind of fit into a weird kind of category, and all those kind of things like that on there. So thank you to everybody that's tuning in. Thank you to everybody that's appearing in the chat there. I do really go ahead and appreciate that for everybody. Now, without further ado, we are going to jump into tonight's episode, which tonight's episode, once again, is going to talk and deal with, as I'm getting my other screen set up here, is going to deal with a pretty significant thing that we're going to talk about, which is coming up into determining what we need to do for frequency, how to understand how frequencies work. We all understand how frequencies work. We know that you put a signal onto a frequency and that sends it out. That's in essence the roadway. But what happens? Why do we need to go digital? Okay? And to be honest with you, there's not really a need to go digital. There isn't. But digital went along and kind of helped achieve some of the things that what we wanted to as an end result. So we're going to start out all the way back on like analog, like single sideband kind of aspects of things like that on tonight's episode here. And then we're going to work our way through and down from there. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to pull up here. I want everybody to go ahead and picture. I want everybody to imagine this road right here, right now. And what I want you to do, and the reason I want you to imagine this road here right now, is largely based on the fact that this road here, okay, is going to be one that is important for us. And the reason it is important for us is because it really dictates how a frequency is. A frequency is just a road through something we're going to use. Now, as you noticed in this presentation here, you're going to see that this road is not paved. It's dirt, it's gravel, it's as natural and bearing as it can be. So let's pretend this is the frequency, but let's pretend like this is sideband for an example, okay? And really, when we come to sideband, we're going to travel on the left side or the right side, right? That's upper sideband or lower sideband, okay? All right. So you take your center frequency. Do you go to the lower side of the frequency or do you go to the upper side of frequency? That's lower sideband versus upper sideband. Okay. But it's what it is. It's right there. It's kind of raw. It's not really per se being used or anything like that on there. But when we evolved with the frequencies, we then found out and we went to FM. Now in single sideband, we're basically modulating the sideband of that. So we're taking a part of it. But when we do FM, which is frequency modulation, because that's what we have to understand to get to there, when we're taking frequency modulation, we're modulating the frequency. So now, if we want to think of this road aspect of things, we're now going to take and make it into a paved road. And that's what you see here is a paved road. Now, this paved road is great. And what we're going to do is we're going to think of it as like wide bandwidth. I mean, super wide bandwidth, okay? Let's go ahead and say it's like it's a full 25 kilohertz bandwidth. So you can use the whole road if you have a big giant vehicle on there, but it is this just giant road for your frequency to go down. We're not talking digital yet. We are still FM. We are still analog. We just said we're at FM, but we're still analog. We're not digitalizing any data yet. We're using sine waves. We're using waveforms coming down this road. Now, the reason I use an example like this is truly because of the aspects of the road. And when I say the aspects of the road, I say those aspects because what's going to end up happening, as you see here in a moment, you're going to find out that as the road continues, as we crunch more and more things onto that road, we started to go ahead and have an issue in frequency spectrum. And that was called that whole narrowbanding aspect. So if we take a look at this picture right up here, we're going to see that this road is just wide. Big signal goes down there, so think of like a big truck, a big car, something like that on there, right? Well, if we want to have more than multiple users, we would need to expand the road. But each road is going to be only so wide, right? We could, in this picture here, we could probably put down and pave, as you kind of see where my mouse is. We could put down another road here, and we could put down another road here. But then the issue comes into play is like, well, where does your road end and another road begin? And what if the roads are too close together? They're too small. My road I'm using may have you encroach on it. You know what I'm saying? So now what we did was back around 2013, they came out with the narrowband mandate. And what that narrowband mandate basically said is like, okay, guys, we have a lot of people using frequencies. Everybody and their brother has a frequency. Now what we were doing is we were having frequencies that were like rounded numbers. So, for example, we might have a frequency that would be like, dot 100 and maybe dot 115 and maybe dot whatever. But then what we did with narrowband is we said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to lay these roads out. And what we're going to do is we're going to stop. So if we're using my two hands as a road here, okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and kind of separate those roads a little bit or somehow saying this and this. But we can't use that big bandwidth that we're normally using, right? We need to narrow down the bandwidth. We need to make the vehicle a little less wide, okay? So that's when that narrowband mandate came down. And when that narrowband mandate came down by the FCC, I said, okay, everybody needs to narrow their bandwidth. And when you narrow that bandwidth, you're going to be able to not encroach over so many frequencies. So what ends up happening is if we think of my fingers here, okay, as frequencies, what happens then with narrowbanding is that we've narrowed the bandwidth down, so create an opening, so now we can use frequencies in between. So now, in essence, you just expanded the frequency spectrum that you have, because now what you did is instead of making a whole pie, you cut the pie in half. Right? Good example. Or in this case, what we did is we took that road, and we took that road, now we painted lines down the road. And now in our example here, we're going to say this is 12.5 kilohertz. This is 12.5 kilohertz. From side to side, that's 25 kilohertz. Now, not everything we're required to mandate to narrowband. Amateur frequencies, good example. Marine frequencies, some other frequencies, some actual LMR frequencies that were not required to mandate to the narrowband because they were already per se narrowbanded, alrighty, or using what they call splinter frequencies. So, for example, and this is kind of just where I came from. Back in the day, a very, very common paging channel was the medical paging channel, which was 152.0025. Alrighty. And that ended in that 25 or 2.5, I should say, kilohertz stepping. So that was already kind of a narrow band. And that was used as like a regular paging frequency. Okay, 152.0025. Alrighty. That was already kind of narrow banded in some cases. So what they did is that they said, okay, hey, wait a minute. When narrow banding came around, we didn't have to narrow band that because that was already in that kind of piece of the pie on there. But frequencies like, let's say 155.125, as an example, guess what? We're going to narrow band that down. And then what ended up happening then is that now you can go ahead, instead of 155.125 taking up this whole bandwidth here, what would end up happening is this might be 155.125, but then this might be the next step, and that narrow band would have to adjust to a step. So maybe that's 12.5 kilohertz stepping less. And then maybe it's 6.25 kilohertz stepping less. But what it did was it took that 25 kilohertz bandwidth and narrowed it down even more. Now, what started to happen was that people started to say, okay, you know what? We're running out of frequency. We're running out of spectrum. Okay. And everybody and their brother's got a frequency. So the question is that now that we went along and have this nice road here, that we took this big road here from before, ready? We took that big road, and that's 25 kilohertz. Now we're taking this down to 12.5 kilohertz on each side. How can we get down to this? And this, in essence, would be like extreme narrow banding, okay? Now what happens is that you hear the side on the side over here, and on the side over here, that's still 25 kilohertz. But now what you did is you put a line down the center. Well, that gave you 12.5 and 12.5 on each side of that line. But now what you did is you broke that line down even further. And now what it is that each lane on this road here is going to be 6.25 kilohertz in bandwidth. Okay? So not only do we have wideband, we had narrow band, we had kind of like extreme narrow banding. Now, that's not a mandate. But it was strongly suggested, it was strongly thought of to say, hey, wait a minute here. How can we get this? How can we become more spectrally efficient? Because before, if I had a wideband, I could have one conversation. Well, if I narrow banded, I sliced it in two, and if I compress my frequency, or if I compress my transmissions on one side, in essence, someone else could get another conversation and frequency going in there. But now if I did this like extreme narrow banding, okay, or ultra narrow banding, sometimes it's called on there, now what I can do is instead of having one path with one FM wideband signal, I can do 4 ultra narrow band frequencies on there. Okay, 4 conversations. But the problem is you can't really do that with FM. And that's where digital comes into play. And that's what we're going to go ahead and talk about tonight. Now, there are 2 types of digital that are out there. The 2 types of digital that are out there are, in essence, TDMA and FDMA. Now, you're probably going ahead and saying, John, that's not correct, because there is there's DMR, there's P25, there's this, and there's this, and there's this. No, that is correct. There are those on there, but they fall into the categories of what uses that technology. Okay? So in other words, what we're saying is that you have to somehow travel the bits of data. Okay? And in our road example here, okay, we're going to use the bits of data as a car, as a truck, as a vehicle, right? That's what we're going to use those bits of data are, all right? Because using our analogy, it makes sense, right? How many vehicles can we put down this road? Now, when we come to think of vehicles down a road, what we're going to have to do for this is we're going to have to think almost kind of what I say is 4th dimensionally. And you're like, huh? You know, I kind of when I explain that to people, they're kind of like, "What? No, there's no 4th dimensional." I'm like, "Marty, it's a weather experiment." Anybody gets back to the future reference, I applaud you. Okay, but that's kind of what we have to do here. Now, the reason we have to think 4th dimensionally is because we have to be able to look down from the top on how this roadway is laid out. Then we have to be able to look from the side of how it's laid out. Okay. Then we have to not only look for the top and the bottom, but now what we have to do is we have to also take a look at it from the aspects of saying, how are we going to go ahead and be putting it down there. So let's go back over to my screen here, okay? And we're going to restart this all over again here. And as I kind of restart this over here, you know, sometimes the technology is just amazing, okay? We're going to go back here. So we're going to go ahead and kind of re-go over it one more time here. We're going to take a look at this, and we're going to be like, hey, here's the deal. Here's the analog stuff. Now we're here. Now we have that choice. And that choice is how do we measure it? Do we measure it as a lane? So looking down from it, measuring time, and then measuring how much of that time is there. That's that kind of that fourth dimensional aspect. Or do we measure it looking from the side, which is how many vehicles I can put across there. And when I look at how many vehicles I can put across there, then the question comes into play of saying, okay, wait a minute here. How many vehicles can I put in there? Now we're looking at it from the side, and now we're still looking at it as time, and now we're measuring time, but we're trying to grasp it all there. And in this case, what we're going to use on this case is we're going to use, and we're going to start out talking with TDMA. Now, TDMA stands for Time Division Multiple Access, okay? And what we're basically saying is we're dividing the data streams into frames. In our example here, we're dividing it into cars. And what we're going to do is we're going to take and see how many cars I can put back to one another. Now, what this goes ahead and shows you on here with this one is, I'm going to put on my laser pointer here so you can see. What this basically goes and shows you here is that, hey, we are looking at dividing that whole frequency aspect there, okay? Now what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we're taking one lane here of traffic, and now as we take that one lane of traffic, we're just seeing how many cars we could put back to one another, and then we're taking a look at it from here. Now, if we should use this example even further, let me get rid of my mouse pointer here, okay? If we look at this example here further, that I'm using my mouse here, what we're going to see is this is a perfect example to use a car, because guess what? Where this dotted line is here and this dotted line on the right here, this area between the dotted line and the solid line, that's the bumpers. That's the guard periods. That is one data signal. That vehicle is one data signal. And what you're going to do is you're going to have car, car, car. And so the cars are going to be all lined up together. And to give a good representation of this, here it is here. What we did is and I apologize for the bad picture. It's kind of hard to find a good picture to describe this, but I think we kind of did a good job here. Is you see it on here, each one of these vehicles is, guess what? A data packet, a data segment. Now, what's cool about TDMA, and using it in the DMR aspect, let's say, it's 30 microseconds, okay, or 30 milliseconds, I think. Yeah, 30 milliseconds, I'm sorry. 30 milliseconds of data. So that vehicle is X amount of length, carries so much, and is always going to be lined up perfectly. Alrighty? So as you see here, let's use this right side here. So you're going to go ahead and have vehicle, 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 vehicle. And all are going to be, let's say, cars. And all the cars are going to be equally spaced out with one another. And it's going to be moving through there, okay? That's how TDMA works. That is how DMR works. Now, to go one step further with TDMA and DMR is kind of it's almost a false nomenclature, because people think that there's two time slots. Okay, well, not think that there is two time slots, but people think that's like it's moving at the same time. No, what's happening in that aspect of things is that you have these cars, they're interlaced. So while they are two lanes, the cars are equally spread out between both lanes going down the highway. Now, because the cars are equally spaced, because the cars know where they need to belong, that and basically it's like you're looking at this car and this car, this car and this car, and that's why it back and forth. That's how you get two time slots. That's how you get two frequency paths. Now, John, why is that important for digital? Why are we looking at that? Because what we did now is we took that 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth, not 25, but 12.5, and we put that lane down the center. And in essence, time slot 1 is only 6.25 kilohertz wide, and time slot 2 is only 6.2 kilohertz wide. And in essence, we're saying this is time slot 1, this is time slot 2. They're interlacing together, and they're going like that. Now that achieves that 6.25 kilohertz bandwidth. Now, is it all just about voice? No. In this case, there can be data. And we're going to get to that in a little bit here. So just hang on. So that's how TDMA is going to work for us. TDMA is going to put it into slots, timed slots, and you know where that timing always takes place. Now, prior to, this is an interesting part people don't know, but prior to basically DMR and radio, two-way radio being used, a big user of TDMA was actually in the cell phone market. And that was one of the first forms of digital voice that AT&T used. AT&T uses GMS now and PCS and all that kind of stuff like that. But when AT&T first came out with digital, they were using TDMA. They were putting signals, packets in there, and then they were going ahead and controlling it that way. T-Mobile, they were kind of always GSM, but they kind of also were kind of the basis of TDMA. But it gives you, we're not getting that granular. The point we're trying to say is that TDMA has been around for a while. I've talked to some people that said, oh, TDMA was a birth child of DMR. No. TDMA was used a heck of a lot for longer before that on there. And that's where TDMA comes into play. It achieves that ultra narrow banding through those time slots. So in essence, what you're doing is you're timing out that frequency. Now that's great if you have a 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth channel you can use. Not everybody has that ability because you can't just use one time slot in there. Okay, within that 12.5 kilohertz channel bandwidth, you have two time slots. So you can't just pick 6.25 out and only use 6.25. No, when a repeater keys up, the repeater transmits on both time slots. So some people said, okay, what is spectrally efficient? Because the whole point of narrowbanding, okay, is to fit more conversations independent of one another through this, right? That's the whole point of narrowbanding, right? More frequency space for users to use. But you have to have that 12.5 kilohertz bandwidth. So if you have, and we'll go back to examples we use, like let's use Mall of America. Mall of America uses a DMR system, right? So if you need, and you have one repeater that, hey, security uses, guess what? Parking enforcement, which kind of maybe falls in the realm of security, right? They don't need to be talking security and time security channel. You can have them both use one repeater. One's on a time slot one, one's on time slot two. Then it's spectrally efficient if they can go through the same repeater. But if Joe's Plumbing and Heating uses one repeater and they use time slot one, and then Big Billy Bob's trucking company uses a different repeater and they use time slot one, guess what? Two separate repeaters, it's not spectrally efficient. So people said, you know what? There needs to be a better way to do it. And then what they decided to do is, and actually this has almost been around longer than TDMA. This is using FDMA, okay? FDMA. And what we're looking at here in FDMA, there's a lot going on over here, okay? Once again, this is three-dimensional. Because what you do is you have frequencies. But instead of saying, okay, here's the lanes of the frequency, and I'm going to space the cars out between the two lanes. No. This is saying I'm using this one lane and this whole one lane, and we're not gonna go ahead and time this out and everything like that. We're just gonna send packets of data, whether it be voice, whether it be data, whatever. We're sending that down that frequency. We're not gonna time things out. You key up your radio and boom, it goes. APCO 25, P25, which is the kind of right now that standard for public safety. That's why it's P25. It came out standard 25 for the Association of Professional Communication Officers. They came up with that standard to say, hey, you're going to be in public safety. You want to use digital. Everybody use this type of digital, right? Okay. But what FDMA does, it says, okay, we can take this narrowband. I don't need to worry about timing. If all I got is 6.25 here, I can send voice. I can send data down that. And what we see then here is we see the frequency here. So this is the 2 lanes or 3 lanes or 4 lanes of the highway. We see time because it goes ahead, and even though it's frequency division, it is using time because it's sending it down the signal. And then the codec, okay, the code goes how high it is. So that's that bandwidth, okay, in essence is there. But then when we kind of 4th dimension, we kind of see the vehicles traveling down there, right? If that makes sense. So now they said this is going to be the better thing to use, the better thing to do. And people are like, okay, yeah, it would be. And that's why FDMA was more popular, and that's why FDMA was used. Now, How do we relate to this, John? Well, let's look at this right here. Okay, let's look at this picture. We have multiple lanes, right? And there is not any single car in a certain order, right? Look at the gap between this car, and look at the gap between this car, and look at the gap between here, and there's a semi, and look at the gap between here, and look at the gap between there. There's nothing. They don't care. FDMA doesn't care. All FDMA cares is that I have a lane and I can send data down. So in this case of the picture here for FDMA, I have a lane, I'm sending data down. Look it over here. I have a lane, I'm sending data down. I don't have to worry about, okay, wait a minute here. In this lane, I need these vehicles equally spaced apart going down this lane. No, screw that. We just need a lane to travel our data. And that's what it is, truly data, ones and zeros, right? Same thing with TDMA. It's packets of ones and zeros. FDMA, it's same thing. It's a stream now of ones and zeros. It's not a packet, okay? Like TDMA, I have a packet of so many ones and zeros. I have a packet of so many ones and zeros. I have a packet of so many ones and zeros. And then it kind of goes that, and each one is that, once again, that 30 milliseconds. FDMA doesn't care. I have a packet of data. I'm sending data down this frequency. I'm sending it down this one, sending it down this one, sending it down this one. And that is FDMA. Now, the question comes into is like, well, John, you mentioned modes, okay? But what are we talking about here? Like, can you give us some examples? Okay, so TDMA gave that example DMR. But P25 is an example of FDMA. NextN is an example of FDMA. Yaesu System Fusion uses FDMA. D-Star uses FDMA. Whoa, John. Those are all different kind of things. Right. Don't get the type of modulation used, which once again is how we transport that data down that frequency, with the codecs, which is how the data is packed and everything like that out there. Okay. That's a big difference. Okay. P25 right now uses IMBE or AMB vocoders. Okay, that is what takes your analog voice in and turns it into ones and zeros, and it uses C4FM vocoder. Excuse me, I should back that up. Let me back that up. It uses C4FM, continuous 4 frequency modulation. Okay, and that's what makes all the ones and zeros and everything like that. And then they convert your analog voice using C4FM, that uses the vocoder, and then that signal from the vocoder goes into a transmitter sends it out in FDMA format. Now, another FDMA technology format is actually NextN or IDAS. Now, with them, okay, they have wideband. They have 12.5 kilohertz and they have 6.25 kilohertz. Okay, so they have, like P25. P25 right now, the majority of it is 12.5 kilohertz. Okay, with NextN, you can go ahead and have wideband, which is 12.5 kilohertz of that data stream. Or you can go down to that 6.25 kilohertz of voice and data stream on there. So in those regards, in that case, that's what's going to go ahead and happen is that it's now those different vocoders, those different formats. Because people said, well, why can't I take a NextN radio in 12.5 kilohertz and take a P25 radio in 12.5 kilohertz and take a Fusion radio and do it in digital voice wide mode? Why can't they all talk to one another? Well, that's because that comes down to the protocol. That comes down to the C4FM or whatever the mixing, the format of the digital technology that they use is involved with, okay? That's what it is. So maybe they all use a C4FM similarity, but the frequencies and tones they're using are different, okay? But the reason I bring this up is because could you now have a 6.25 kilohertz frequency for P25, a 6.25 kilohertz frequency for NextN, let's call it, okay? And then have another 6.25 frequency for, let's say, Fusion. So now you have these 3 frequencies right here, and they're all different modes. Can you do that and not going to interfere if they're properly spaced apart? You're right, because they're 6.25. Could you have 2 DMR repeaters doing that? Well, no, because they're TDMA. They need that spacing for the 2 time slots to go there. I can't have an overlapping a time slot. Not that I'm saying you overlap frequencies in FDMA, but FDMA gives you the specific roadways. Once again, up here, the specific roadways that your frequency is being used, that you divide it down the frequencies into there. Now, which one's better? And that's a left Twix versus right Twix kind of thing. I'll be honest with you, because in that regards and in that aspect of things, there is no right way over one another. Okay, there really isn't. And when you say there is no right way over one another, there isn't, because here's the deal. If you need voice and data simultaneously, DMR is a really good choice, because you can actually send voice down one time slot and data down the second time slot. So in that case, DMR's got you beat. But if you go then and you're saying, hey, here's the deal, how can I go ahead and how can I utilize if I just need voice? Well, then maybe you choose a different digital mode that's going to go ahead and just use that narrow band aspect on there. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it. And that's why I'm saying there's no one right way to do it. I've heard people also go ahead and use, and we'll kind of touch this a little bit, but like digital trunking. Like people's like, okay, you can trunk, you can do different frequencies together. Well, TDMA does digital trunking better than FDMA. Once again, this is kind of one of those apples to oranges kind of thing. And the reason it's kind of an apples to oranges kind of thing is really based on the fact of saying, okay, wait a minute here. You're comparing apples to oranges, because now what you can do with trunking is if you have 2 repeater frequencies, you have in essence 4 time slots, so you can trunk better in theory, right? Where if you have like something that's more so of like the FDMA side, well, if you want to have 4 talk paths, we'll kind of call it there in trunking, you're going to have 4 separate frequencies, and that's there. So once again, what is better than the other? There's no answer to that. There really isn't. It's all going to be on what is used, okay? What is popular on there. Once again, DMR comes from a European standard. NextEn and stuff like that, they use that kind of as a European standard also too. There is some standards out on there for how to deal with 6.25 there. Now the names are different, okay? Understand that when it comes to it. It's like the European standard is not known as DMR. That's digital mobile radio. That's the general consensus. It uses TDMA and this. You know, just like NextEn. NextEn uses TDMA and C4FM and a narrowband, that kind of thing. Those are the names put on there. Like Moto Turbo. That's Motorola's version of DMR, right? Okay. NextEn. That's Kenwood's version of digital narrowbanding. Okay. Don't get hung up on that, folks. What you need to take a look at is you need to see how the radios are going to use. Now, when you look at TDMA and FDMA, one last thing that people are going to argue and fight you about is they're going to say the effective range of communications. And I do have to say there is some truth to this. And the truth of the matter is that because TDMA uses time division, you need to have the sync pulses come out of it. So if you have your radio and you're talking on time slot 1, when you key up, you have to have a sync pulse of saying, I'm on time slot 1, so I'm keying on and off, 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 because I'm only time slot 1, time slot 1, time slot 1, right? I'm not going time slot 2, right? So if we were to go ahead and use that example of time slot 1 and time slot 2, you would see the radios going like this. That's how they talk. But in this regards, what comes into play is as it goes ahead and it brings into the aspect of saying, okay, I as a repeater for TDMA, I have to transmit both time slots. I have to let the radio that's using me know and saying, hey, okay, what time slot am I on? It needs to know where time slot 1 is at, because if it just is, you're just transmitting time slot 1 to the radio, it's kind of like, okay, I don't have a reference point, okay? It's like taking an antenna and you're just holding the antenna in the air, no ground. It's not going to know the ground plane. It's not going to know its reference. FDMA, though, in that case, FDMA, they say might have a better reach because you're not looking for that sync pulse, okay? Yes, they do make high-powered FDMA radios. So they do make like 100-watt radios and stuff like that. DMR repeaters, you're not, or I should say radios, you're not seeing any 100-watt DMR radios, right? No mobile radios are doing 100-watt DMR. I give a good example, like the Kenwood NX5000 series. Okay, they make a 100-watt drawer unit, right? The radio can put out 100 watts, does not do DMR. Okay, why not? Because once you get it to high power, then you start to lose that time and sync pulse. The advantage to TDMA, though, over FDMA is while there is that timing sync, you can put more stuff, more aspects into one quote unquote frequency than you would need multiple frequencies. So once again, it's this whole back and forth kind of thing on there. So with that being said, it comes down to that time of the show where you don't really bends my antenna. You know what really bends my antenna is the aspect of going ahead and saying, you know what, one mode is better than the other. I was saying it how people say that all along, and it really isn't. The majority of people that go along and want to use TDMA is because they had someone they knew that used TDMA. The majority of people that want to use an FDMA kind of technology, once again, are those that are there. We kind of got to go out of our comfort realm, okay? Not a lot of people sometimes will understand how radios work, but there is a significant difference in how the things could work. Well, what the hell do you mean by that, John? What I mean by that is that with FDMA, it allows you to either do the narrow banding or the 12.5 kilohertz. So 12.5 or that's 6.25. The majority of stuff out there, P25 phase 1, next gen, stuff that sounds good audio-wise, fidelity-wise, is going to have wider bandwidth than if something that's more narrow and compressed. Simple physics, okay? You can only compress so much into something, right? It happens, okay? But where TDMA, once again, takes advantage is that there's more of a compressed sound, but it does have a little bit more spectral bandwidth. But once again, people will go ahead and say, oh, P25 is the way to go, or NextGen's the way to go, or this or this. Well, not really. It's all going to be on how you come into it. One of the things that does strongly drive TDMA versus FDMA is the cheap Chinese radios. I know some of you may get pissed off about that. I know some of you probably have that, but there are radios that are the Chinese radio invasions, and they build cheap radios for a certain mode. In this case, it's DMR. DMR is a standard over there in a lot of European and Asian countries. You're not going to find a whole heck of a lot of FDMA technology. You are going to in some places, because there are other types of technology there, like for example, Tetra is an FDMA kind of technology, to a degree. It divides the frequencies in there to use, okay, but instead of kind of doing that. But what I'm getting at though is that in that aspect of things, you're going to see DMR pretty well spread. Now, why did DMR kind of pick up, and why is TDMA easy to use to pick up? Because there's a lot of relatively easy radios to purchase out there. It's driven a lot by the money aspect on there. APCO 25, while used outside of the US, not very popular. You're going to find radios out there that, if you go to foreign countries and you say, hey, what about DMR? What about Tetra? What about NextGen? What about FDMA? Like stuff like P25. You're going to find a lot of people like, huh? What? Those kind of things like that on there. And that's okay. That's how the world is over there. That's how their frequency stuff is designed and deployed out there. But to go ahead and just say one mode is better because I can buy better radios than that is kind of ridiculous, almost asinine in a way. And I'll give you a good example. P25. P25 was this elite public safety type of digital voice technology, and the radios were super expensive and da-da-da-da-da. Well, I could tell you this with great ease, that the cost of the radios today for new multi-band, multi-mode, all those kind of things like that, go back 10 years ago. So go back to 2013. Hell, go back to 2003. Okay? You're going to go ahead and find out that those P25 radios were very, very high priced also too. That was extremely. The ones you can buy off eBay now for $150, $200, they were not always $150 and $200, okay? They were $2,000, $3,000. But as technology has advanced and more radios have flooded the used market, now it's viable. What do I use? Some people have asked. They said, John, what's your favorite digital mode? And I'll say, all of them. And I'll say, what? And I'll say, yeah, all of them. Well, what do you mean? What do you mean all of them? Well, all of them. Okay? JJK Communications, the sponsor of our show. Okay, I forgot to mention them. But we get to play with radios and stuff like that, right? P25, I love for public safety. Has good audio quality. Has great clarity. It really can handle the voice inflections of your male deep officers compared to your high-pitched female officers, the people yelling in the microphone, all that kind of stuff like that on there. For my business side of things, what do I like? I like DMR, because if you have customers, I need the maximum amount of bandwidth to put as many customers as you can on a tower. TDMA, DMR works great on there. But I'll tell you what I really like is that if I am out and about and I'm using communications between my family and stuff like that, I will use NextN. Narrowband, digital, and it has good voice quality. So yeah, I use all of them. Okay? I do. And once again, there's no right or wrong way. The thing is don't be blitzed and glamored by the radio company saying, this is the answer, this is the choice. No, BS. No. For a person to come in and the salesperson, and I'll tell you, I've known salespeople that they have pushed a digital voice technology because guess what? They got spiffs off of it at that time. When I was young, I worked in the cell phone company, okay, or cell phone company, with cell phone company, I should say, right? Selling cell phones, right? And I'll tell you what, man, Verizon, CDMA, which is carrier division, which is a different thing, but just follow me on this, right? I had salespeople I know, we're going to push the hell out of Verizon this month because CDMA technology, yes, and this and this and this. Well, wait a minute. Why are you pushing Verizon? Well, for every Verizon phone I go ahead and sell an activation, I get 15 extra bucks. Yeah. Next month, AT&T had a special. You know what? Forget CDMA. Use TDMA. TDMA is great. It does this and this and this and this. What the hell? You were just pushing CDMA last month. Yeah, but this month, AT&T's got a spiff on there. Okay? That's what it is. Salesmen are going to sell you whatever the hell they want to sell you. But when it comes to digital voice, take a look at what you want to do. Now, there are other digital voice modes out there than what I kind of related, okay? There is DPMR, which is Digital Private Mobile Radio. That uses UHF frequencies over in the UK. That uses some FDMA stuff. So tonight, I just want you to take away FDMA versus TDMA and how we're sending the signals down that frequency. Okay, this is the road. This is how the road's going to act, and this is what it is. In upcoming episodes, we'll dive into the different digital modes, and we'll start to say, okay, this is what is used with this in order to make that car that we're sending down the road. This is what is used on this type of technology with this, and how it works to send that car down the road. So that has been tonight's episode of FDMA versus TDMA fight. I hope everybody enjoyed it. This is one of the things I think, like I said, that really people get confused on, and I really wanted to make sure people understood it because, like I said, it is imperative. It's imperative to understand because it's going to go ahead and really kind of sort of determine how it is and how those frequencies travel. So I'm glad everybody turned in. I hope everybody's staying safe. The weather is getting much better, in my opinion. It's a nice, cool day, that kind of thing like that on there. So I want everybody to take care. I want everybody to stay safe. If you have some cigars, enjoy your cigars. Take care, everybody. And until then, stay safe. Thanksgiving, well, Halloween's right around the corner there. Next week. Yeah, it's right around the corner there. And then we got Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday and everything like that. So until then, everybody, take care, stay safe. God bless.